am delighted to be here with my colleague from the great state of Texas, Monica Guerrero Rogers. The format for today is that we'll be briefly each presenting on a project that we developed through the Lumina PACE grant and in our regions. And we will spend probably a little more than half of our session talking about our projects. And then we do want to leave time at the end for you to think about how these models might be used or borrowed or stealed, that is a word, for your campuses. So I do want to ask you, as we're presenting, just kind of keep in mind as you're learning about the challenges that we faced and the models we developed. I'm going to encourage you to think about which ones you share at your institution, because we will have time at the end to discuss that. And our hope is that that what we're sharing will have an impact for you and the students that you serve. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about FLCC. We can go to the next slide. FLCC stands for Finger Lakes Community College. We are a largely, almost solely rural college in upstate New York. And if you've been to New York, you know it's actually a very large state. For those who haven't been to New York, most of the time you say New York, you think of New York City. But New York State is about 8 hours, an 8-hour drive from one edge to the other. And we're in a largely rural area in upstate between the city of Rochester and Syracuse. We serve 4 counties. Our enrollment is just under 6,000 students at present. Our service area is, I know for those of you out in the West and Midwest, this is going to sound tiny, but our service area is about 3,000 square miles. So for us, that is a really important element of serving the communities that we're part of. We do not have a centralized population center like some institutions do. We are home historically to the Haudenosaunee, which is part of the Six Nations of the Iroquois. When the area was settled by Europeans, it was immediately identified as being very similar to the geography of some areas of France and Italy. So we're very well known for our winemaking and our breweries, because the soil and the conditions are very, very suitable for that. What people know a little bit less about our region, we're known for hospitality and tourism, but the industries that really are the bread and butter of our area are primarily advanced manufacturing and healthcare. And in advanced manufacturing, I like to emphasize the advanced part of that. We have been impacted, like many areas, with the move of manufacturing out of the country, or out of our region at least. But in that little sector of advanced manufacturing, we are really prospering. And these are smaller businesses that do work with very unusual or precious materials with very high precision, and often make parts that are one of a kind. So this is we're not talking mass production, we're talking advanced manufacturing. The next slide, please. We have three campus centers, which are analogous to satellite campuses in other states. In addition to our central campus, this is a map of our service area, and the little stars are our campus centers. And I hope you're seeing from this map, it illustrates very well that our campus centers are not exactly distributed throughout our service area. They're pretty central, so they're important. But if you've ever been to upstate New York, the top of this graphic here is Lake Ontario, and the small lakes more in the center of the graphic are called the Finger Lakes. And if you live anywhere near Lake Ontario in the winter, we get a lot of snow. I'm sure many of you hear about the snowstorms in Buffalo. We're impacted the same way. So the drive from someone who lives on the shore of this lake to any of our campus centers in the summer is maybe 35 minutes, in the winter 2.5 hours. So that's a real issue for us in serving our local community, is that geography. You can also see from the lakes here, if I live on the west side of one of these lakes and my employer is on the east side, there's no bridges. Let's put it that way. So two locations that are a mile away across one of the Finger Lakes could be, again, an hour and a half drive because you have to actually drive around these lakes. So transportation geography pose some interesting challenges for us. Next slide, please. So what we wanted to do, and we started this project as part of a national, it was really a national research and design project called the Bridges Rural Initiative. We were one of 5 colleges in the country, and we can actually go to the next slide and I can just highlight those schools for a minute because they might be here. These 5 schools were part of a national cohort. And what we wanted to focus on is the question that's on the next slide. Our central design question was, how can we ensure or strengthen the capacity of our rural colleges to serve as economic engines for growth? And this is all about access for underrepresented groups. And it is about economic mobility for those individuals and families. And it's also about employers having local qualified talent. The biggest problem our employers face, I'm sure it's true for many of you, is access to qualified talent. So that was the underlying focus of this work. And on the next slide, please, you'll see some of the key things we learned. And this is about 1.5 years worth of really intensive just listening. We did surveying, we did focus groups, we did interviewing. We also conducted, we did gallery walks, as well as doing, traditional quantitative research. We learned a couple things, and I share these because we're starting to realize this is common in a lot of rural communities. First of all, people love living here. As many people in rural communities, they just love their communities. We also learned that that love is very localized. So if someone says, I love living in the Finger Lakes, if you ask them, what they really need is, I love living in Penn Yan, New York, or I love living in Clifton Springs, New York, which, in many cases, this is a village of 3,000, 10,000 people. They're very small micro communities, and people want to stay there if they can. We also learned that broadband is an issue when it comes to hybrid and online learning for folks, and that it's very uneven. So in our communities, we really didn't learn this until COVID, and it was a hard lesson. But when COVID hit, a lot of our local school districts told us that when they pivoted to online learning, they discovered that where there was access was largely more affluent and whiter communities, and where there was not was generally communities with people of color where there was more poverty. So that unevenness is huge in terms of access, at least for us it was. And I already touched on transportation as a barrier. So what we discovered is that besides what you see here is that really most of our target learners, adults, underrepresented groups, their driver for education was a stable family life, financial security, and a stable career. So those are the big lessons, you might say, for us. So we can go to the next slide, please. We kind of crystallize all of our research into these 3 needs. And this is, like the 10,000-foot view. But given the opportunity, our learners wanted to live, stay where they are, and find a good local job. They wanted their education to have a payoff that was concrete and that was quick. It was less valuable for these folks, at least, to have education for education's sake, or to make a long-term expensive commitment to education that didn't provide a tangible benefit right away. And the other thing we learned, as hopefully you all know here, is, college systems can be hard to navigate. So we learned that. We had students who had tremendous experiences at our institution that were rooted in the fact that they had someone they knew cared about them, that they had that sense of belonging to the community and that sense of being, that felt sense of being cared about. And we had students who who gave us feedback. For example, they would say to us, I wish the college had had this service when I went. It would have been easier for me. And they were identifying services that we in fact had, that they just were not aware of or didn't know how to access. So these three elements, these three needs became elements of our pilot, which we call GRIT. And that's on the next slide, please. So GRIT stands for Growing Rural Infrastructure Together. And we transcribe those needs into three elements of delivery. One is we made training local. So the way we deployed this, we knew in today's economic times, we weren't going to stand up 10 different multi-million-dollar advanced manufacturing centers in our 4 counties. Okay, that's expensive, and buildings, you know, we know what's happening, hopefully, with overhead for buildings now. So we knew that wasn't possible. So the community site element of this is we asked our partners in our local ecosystem if they would be willing to donate time, space, and broadband to hosting college courses. And if they did, we would provide the instruction and we would provide the technology for synchronous live learning. And basically, we deployed large WebEx enabled portable screens at those sites. And we have had success with that. We have libraries, we have Department of Social Service offices, we have employers who are willing to open up their doors to the public, who are GRIT sites. And we strategically put those sites in these micro communities where we did have these clusters of population and where we had employers who needed talent, because we were committed to not making transportation or computer access at home a requirement for someone to participate. So they could walk to their learning site, and when they finished, they could apply to a job in their same neighborhood, so to speak. And then the second element of GRIT was focusing on that need for immediacy and relevancy. So we built these programs on micro pathways. And if you've not seen a micro pathway map, I put one on this slide. The blue boxes on this slide are programs that we have that include certifications, and the green boxes are occupations for which someone becomes qualified when they complete that training. And so what you have here is time on the horizontal axis and income on the vertical axis. And micro pathways are simply, the way we define them at FLCC, is they are trainings that can be completed in 3 to 9 months, that are open the doorway to an occupation that is in an in-demand job in a high-growth sector. And if it doesn't immediately get someone to a sustainable wage, it's on a pathway that will get them to a sustainable wage within 2 years. So this is an example for advanced manufacturing, going from a semi-skilled job that may pay minimum wage, and 3 of our certifications on that path that would bring them to $55,000 to $67,000 a year. So that was the second piece. We knew that we honestly, and the college does a tremendous job with online learning, but we knew the main focus was going to be this immediacy and relevancy for job readiness. And that's the second element. Third piece, it was a personal success coach. This goes back to to navigating systems. It ties to our learnings that many of the students we were really wanted to participate in the college experience were first-generation students. So they told us, I'll never forget, we had one of our focus groups in an interview. We said, I just want to know, a student said this, I just wanted to know who is my person. Who do I call if I have a question? So that's exactly what we implemented, a single point of contact for every student that supported them for non-academic issues. Their instructor focused on academics, but anything that could impact their ability to complete, they contacted this person, and that person either helped them immediately and directly, or referred them to the correct place in the organization, but walked with them through that until their problem was solved. It wasn't just, call the registers, they say call the bursars, call the bursars, they say call student accounts. We know how that can be for some students. All right, next slide, please. This was our pilot, our first year. We had 2 sites that we started with. One was a central school district that had an adult learning center. One was a workforce development office. Our pilot program was an advanced manufacturing program. We enrolled 13 students, 12 completed. 11 of those received their credential on time. The 12th one did receive their credential after an extension. Now, of all this information on this slide, the most important is on the bottom right. And that is this. For me personally, and for our institution, one of these sites had 2 students. The other site had 6. And we have 5 students who did have access and we allowed to study from home. They had a computer and had broadband. For the college, in terms of, we're a business. The minimum enrollment for this class is 8 students. And for us, as a rural college that is not as large as some, that's an issue. And if you look at these numbers, none of those sites would have supported a class. We couldn't have had a fully online section with 5 students. But by running the class synchronously with the instructor teaching to multiple sites at once, we now, I just couldn't be prouder of this. I know you probably hear it in my voice. Those students all had access to education who probably would not have had it otherwise. So that's the pilot. Now we can go to the next slide. I just want to share with you a couple really key things through the PACE Lumina grant and Achieving the Dream. Really, where we started was phase 2. We knew we were on to something, but it was small scale. So what we wanted to do is scale up the program and really look closely at sustainability for this as a model. So that's what we did. Next slide, please. The elements we focused on through the PACE Lumina grant was financial. Can we afford to sustain this? And we learned through this project, we did some pretty in-depth analysis and then looked at our numbers. And we learned that even with the cost of standing up equipment and paying a small stipend to the sites, they don't charge us room rental. We don't want sites that do this for the money. We want sites that do it because they care. And we happen to give them a small stipend for supporting the project. So we discovered that after 2 or 3 sessions, this was break even. What's exciting, if anyone out there is considering something like this, at the time we did it, it was $15,000 a site for the equipment. Now you can use an OWL, which if you can Google that offline, but you can use an OWL, which is a very small piece of technology for doing live synchronous, and you can stand up a site for under $2,000. So it's incredibly inexpensive to do this. We also added several additional micro pathways to our programming, and we added sites. So we are now at 8 sites in our region, and that there's no real ceiling on that, but 8 sites has added to it. The nice benefit we learned through expanding the sites is we didn't necessarily see businesses as potential sites. We were looking at nonprofits, community service agencies, but we have businesses who they're very smart about public relations. They're very rooted in the community. They do philanthropy and things like that. So since we're a public access institution, we told them, you have to open this up to the public for open enrollment students. We're not just, we're not going to pay for equipment as a public institution that is just going to train your employees. But that was the benefit to them. If they had employees who wanted training with us, they got off of work, walked down the hall, and took their class. I guess we can go to the next slide. Yeah. The next slide, there's so much we did with this project, but I want to leave some time for Monica, and I'm almost at 20 minutes now. So this is the impact we've seen. These are not huge ends yet, if you're a statistical person, but we are incredibly encouraged with this model. Our partners love it. It uses their sites. It brings people in. It's a completely added value to say you can take courses here. The amazing thing for us was the impact of the success coach. Candidly, we had pretty good completion and pass rates in our workforce programs before implementing that. I didn't think we'd move the needle on that much. One of my greatest challenges with my provost and president is always like, look, we're at 95% completion rate. We'll try to improve that, but it's really not bad. And we saw that. We saw that through that coach as a first point of contact and the early intervention that followed. So we're very encouraged. If people have questions on any of the elements here, we could jump back to the last slide, please. I'm just gonna, I'm sorry, I've jump backwards to slide 12. I'm just gonna flag this for one moment. Because I just touched on this briefly, and I want to bookmark it for afterwards during our Q&A, not for now. But these were really critical elements that the Lumina PACE project helped us with, particularly the financial scaling and targeted marketing. So if people do have questions about that, I'm happy to talk about them at a later time. And with that said, I will turn it over to Monica.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. I am Monica Guerrero-Rogers, and I am coming to you live from San Antonio, Texas, home of the Spurs, which we will not talk about. Unfortunately, we're not doing so well, but home of the Alamo, which introduces a segue to Alamo Community Colleges, which I'm going to expand on. But before I begin, I know some of the questions in the chat were regarding scheduling and program delivery, and so I'm going to cover a little bit of that. I'm going to talk to you about who we are as a district. I'm going to talk to you about my department, in which we're a little bit unique in how we service our district and how we help our colleges. But then I'll talk to you about some of the things that we've done in terms of program delivery, some of our scheduling, and then I'll talk to you about what we've done with the PACE grant. So bear with me, but I'll kind of explain to you how we've gotten to the point where we were utilizing PACE. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, it's a unique process in that, or a unique scenario in that we are a community college of 5 colleges, and I'll expand on that in the next slide. But we are a district support office. So I operate out of the Alamo Colleges district office, and specifically working for Alamo Colleges Online. I lead the enrollment team here. So our job is basically helping students through the onboarding piece with basically never having to step foot on campus. We know who our competitors are, right? We know that these major proprietary schools they have a great model in terms of onboarding. And so we want to make sure that our community members, our students that are in our environment, have that unique experience and tied with a campus that's close to their community. Next slide, please. So we actually provide services for over 100,000 students. So we are the #1 provider in terms of workforce. In this 100,000, this includes our academic as well as our workforce programs. We do have 5 campuses that are unique, that do have a distinction of HSI, and we also have 8 regional centers as well. In our offerings, we offer over 350 programs. This includes associate degrees, obviously, certificates, all that good stuff. We're really excited. We're introducing bachelor degrees now. So we have our first on deck on one of our community colleges for nursing. So super excited about that. That was a heavy lift. And I can talk to you a little bit about how we're programming that in our next couple of slides. Next slide, please. Again, there's a typo on this. Please forgive me on San Antonio College. I got a little excited about that. But these are our 5 colleges. This is our region that we cater to. Bexar County is our primary county, which houses San Antonio, but these are our neighborhood surrounding counties as well. And so just wanted to kind of give you some insight as to what we're servicing and what we look like demographically, or regionally, I'm sorry. Next slide, please. So again, we are very proud. We are a Malcolm Baldrige District winning, and we also are a Leader College of Distinction with Achieving the Dream campus or community college district. So very excited about these. We know that with this comes great responsibility in making sure that we provide ample customer service to our students, as well as making sure that our processes are fully vetted and efficient and effective for our students. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we pride ourselves on is we have a process here in terms of, again, we're very unique in that we service our 5 colleges. We do not have any operations of wanting to stand alone as a 6th college. I know that is the trend right now. We've looked at that. That doesn't work for us right now. So what we do is advertise the offerings for our 5 colleges. And so we work with them specifically to see which camp or which programs are offered fully online. And then we advertise those on our sites. So it's nothing that we have to create. We're basically utilizing the knowledge that's existing at their campuses already. Now, of course, what this means is that we do evaluation in terms of looking at our data in terms of our strategies for course registration. At the end of the semester, at the end of the terms, we are looking at making sure that courses are being delivered for these programs. We're also looking at what does the registration behavior look like for our students, right? In terms of, are they, swirling from inside and outside of a fully online to face-to-face type of context. And with that data, we're able to share that with the colleges, and this helps them be able to utilize scheduling modalities and be able to set up their classes as we roll out our semesters. Next slide, please. Again, we do, as you're very familiar with, our students here are very intentional about either wanting to transfer to pursue a higher degree or wanting to immediately join the workforce. And so again, with our programs, we make sure that we're fully vetted on what our students' needs are. So we're looking at our general associate degrees, and then we're also measuring the need of our fully online applied sciences degrees. And so we're making sure that we're marketing that. We're very fortunate, and I'll talk to you about what our model looks like in terms of enrollment and advising. I think one of the issues is understanding what the student actually wants and making sure they're in the correct program, right? I think a lot of times students come in with having an indication or having a possible slight knowledge of what they want to do, but our goal is to make sure that it's intentional and that they're pursuing the correct program. And so these are a list of our top programs that we see for fully online. So again, making sure that we are familiar with what the high demand is, and of course, making sure that we are working with our colleges to ensure that these degrees align with high wage, high demand, and we're utilizing that in some of our marketing as well. And I'll talk to you about, this is some of the pre-work that we've done preview to the PACE grant, but I'll talk to you about some of the other perspective, right? So we are very data informed in terms of our the way we operate as a district as a whole. But of course, it's always very imperative that we get that qualitative from our student perspective. So I think that with the PACE, it really allowed us to close that loop and close that gap and understanding what the students' needs really were. It's one thing to see data, but then it's one thing to actually hear the students and understand that. So it was really awesome to see what the experience was. So I'll talk to you towards the end about what the result was. Next slide, please. So along with our degrees, one of the things that we've pride ourselves is in our offerings is our micro credentials. One of the things that we saw, and you may share this experience with the pandemic, we saw a lot of adult learners coming back, wanting to necessarily pursue certificates, but wanting something quick. And so we knew we needed to meet that need. And so again, we were looking at our high wage programs, our high demand. We did some data analysis. And so we wanted to make sure that we had offerings that were tailoring to the needs of our students. And so with that, we started to upskill. We started to offer some micro credentials that would allow students to upskill in the areas that they want. So these were some of our adult learners who potentially had degrees already, but wanted to move up in their industries. And so we offer these are 6-month programs. They typically finish before 6 months. But some of our most prominent programs are our program management, website design, analytics, that's a huge one. And then of course, just looking at just different types of marketing programs as well. So again, this is another offering that we have introduced, and we've seen significant growth in this area. And so we're constantly looking at meeting the needs and making sure that our programs are aligned with what our students are asking for. Next slide, please. So what's really unique about our district, and I'm really excited about this, is that we do offer 2 very distinct models here. We have our enrollment model, and then we have our advising model, which I'll speak to you on the next slide. But in terms of our enrollment, so our enrollment is strictly working with students in the onboarding capacity. And so as soon as a student submits an inquiry or submits an application, within 24 hours, they are speaking to one of our agents. And so we're making sure that, that we have a program that they're interested in. We're making sure that we help them through the application process. Again, we are looking at the national data industry of our collective behavior. And again, through PACE, we've really learned a lot about our students in terms of shopping around for campuses or for programs or for enrollment information. So we make sure that our students are walking them through the onboarding process. And then of course, with partners that we have, we are making sure that we're working with them through tuition assistance as well. Next slide. Thank you. And so here we offer, once our student gets through the enrollment funnel and has been onboarded, walking them through, submitting transcripts, making sure their placement exam is completed, all that good stuff. They're then case loaded to their advisors, an academic advisor. And so their advisor will work with them throughout the duration or completion of their degree or certificate or whatever they've signed up to pursue with us. And so our caseload's really small. It's about 350 students to one advisor. Again, as big as we are, we're very prideful in that we've really narrowed down that model. But they are working with them on different touch points, career advising, transfer advising, different support services advising, advocacy centers, getting them familiar with all the different programs that we offer. So again, when we looked at the PACE grant, next slide, please. Thank you. So in looking at the PACE grant, we knew, we really wanted to evaluate what are we offering? Are they meeting the needs of the students? What are we doing for our students? Who is our student, right? So here's a profile of our student, of our online student profile, which mirrors our traditional student taking classes face-to-face. We know that she's Hispanic. We know that she's an adult learner at the age of 27. We know that she's enrolled part-time, and we know that she's a continuing student. Our biggest demographic is at 18 to 21. However, that's not our best persisting student, right? So this is where we really dove deep on, okay, we know that they're enrolling. We've seen extreme enrollment growth, and in terms of online, we've seen great growth since fall 2019, since I've been here in this role. We've possibly grown over 40% for online only. And so we know that the need is there. However, we then looked at, are they persisting? Are they retaining? What are we doing? And what is the group that's mostly impacted? And we know that it's our male, African-American or Black, Hispanic, Latino. Thus started our work with the PACE grant. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so our goal in this was, we really wanted to make sure that we were enrolling students that were adult learners, that were considered first-time in college students from the ages between 25 to 64, and of course, that fit in that demographic of Black, African-American, and Hispanic Latino. And we wanted to do so with PACE in 3 different capacities. Oh, I'm sorry, I saw some of the chats. But yes, we do offer professional certificates and non-credit. So our micro-credentials are considered our non-credit offerings. Hopefully that answers your question. Sorry, I kind of poked in that. But in terms of our offerings, and actually I can pause. Ivy, I know we're getting some questions. You want me to take a pause here and we can answer some of those?
If you want, that's up to you, Monica. If you want to,
absolutely.
go for it. Yeah, so let me pass along. So John just asked in the chat if advisors for adult learners are a separate unit from the advisors for traditional age students.
No, great question. So typically we assign advisor based on programs. So based on their majors, based on degrees, we want to ensure that our advisors are subject matter experts in that area. And so typically we follow that model.
Great. And then I think you spoke to Sherry's question about $179. How many credits is this? And is that for non-credit professional education, or can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's actually the fee for the actual certificate, the credential itself. So there's about 5 courses within each one of those credentials. And so it's about $179 for a 6-month subscription. And so typically we see students finish within 4 to 5, depending on the program. But this isn't a non-credit side, but we are doing some work, again, because of the needs of our students. We are doing some work to try to see how we can utilize that for prior learning credit.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Monica.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for your questions. Greatly appreciate it. We're using Coursera. Great question. Thank you. Awesome. So in terms of our PACE, so again, we really wanted to look at 3 areas: student recruitment and enrollment support. We wanted to look at and evaluate some marketing and recruitment strategies for our promotion. And then of course, we wanted to look at some program support and analytics. Next slide, please. Awesome. So our pre-work in terms of enrollment, we wanted to make sure that we were hiring a consultant to kind of look at some of the issues that we were, or just kind of look at what we're doing, right? And I just want to stop and say, I commend all of you guys for being on here. I tell my husband all the time, we are like the MacGyvers of education, because we are constantly being innovative and creative to find different strategies to help us, give us the best support for our students. So first, I just wanted to commend y'all on this. But this was a very humbling experience, let me tell you, through this PACE grant. We wanted to make sure that, what our communication strategies looked like. Were we targeting our audience? Was it inclusive towards the demographic that we really wanted to showcase? Was there a reason why we weren't seeing growth for that specific population that we wanted to target? And so, of course, our goal was to make sure, if it wasn't, how can we then create some appealing messages that, we're very intentional about getting them to enroll. And then, of course, we wanted to conduct surveys and focus groups to understand again and meet the needs of this population. So next slide, here are some of our results, and I'll just share briefly just a few of them, and I won't highlight everything that we've learned through this because I could keep you on forever. But like I said, this was a very humbling experience in the sense that we thought our communication strategies were amazing. And then we worked with Buffalo Noah Levitz. And let me tell you, it was a very humbling experience to know that our communication strategies were not the best. They weren't very inclusive, and they weren't very concise. And so we know that our adult learners especially need the quick call to action in terms of communication strategies. So I was very humbled, and we have been challenged, and we've implemented some of these changes for the spring. And we've actually seen some great engagement in terms of our communication strategies. So we're really excited to do that. Again, this work came out of this grant. And so we understand now what industry best practices are. We prided ourselves on our text message campaigns. We utilize two-way communication strategies, and we average around 15% engagement rate, which is pretty high for standard industries. But again, to kind of be slapped on the wrist and say, not necessarily slapped on the wrist, but kind of to be shaken up a little bit and say, hey, there's some room for improvement. It was excellent, because it's exactly what we're trying to do, right? Give the best service to our students. Next slide, please. Oh, and going back, I'm sorry, I think this is, oh, no. Yes, this is, sorry. Next slide. Right there, perfect, I'm sorry. So then we looked at our marketing and recruitment, right? So then we wanted to make sure that we were partnering with an agency to look at our search engine optimization. Again, understanding, are we meeting the needs of the demographic that we're targeting? What improvement can we do? We wanted to make sure we're also including an influencer and campaign. And I'm pretty sure you guys have kind of seen this trend exist in higher education. I know that there's a platform that we are not allowed to talk about. Over here, we just call it the talk to prevent any issues with our legal team. But we know our students are out there, and we know that our students are bestsellers. And so we wanted to do some work on there. So here's some of our results. So we were able, next slide, I'm sorry. There we go, awesome. So these beautiful faces are our next online ambassador influencers. So we, again, wanted to make sure we were inclusive, but we wanted to make sure that it mirrored the demographic that we were trying to include in terms of what we started out the PACE grant. Now, unfortunately, of course, we wish we had more male representation, but we know that our women is the dominant in this industry, as we service the majority are women. So we were okay with our influencer campaign, but these are our next 10 faces. So this was a work that was created out of the PACE grant. And so each one of these students was able to share their story. And so it was an awesome experience. Again, another humbling experience to see what our students go through. We know kind of, right, we hear the backstories, but just to hear them, all that they persevered, it was amazing. And so we will be utilizing these in the fall semester as well in the summer for our marketing campaigns. So we were able to do some video shoots with them, some commercial ads, some other things that we'll be piloting on social media ads. And of course, they'll be sharing their stories and their experience. Now, along with this, which is not on my slide, we also did, of course, some focus survey groups in which we did have a more targeted population that mirrored the demographic we were trying to get at. And so we learned a couple of things, and I know I'm running short on time, so let me get through this really quickly. I'm so sorry about that. We learned that our students, what we thought we knew what our students wanted was true, but there was some more additional information that we learned. And so we're trying to implement that with our enrollment push, our marketing push this fall semester. We had some very strong perspectives from our males, and so it was great insight. And so I highly recommend, again, if you're in a situation where you have an instinct, or if you're recognizing that there might be a gap, utilize your students, utilize their voices, because they have some great insight where we're like, why didn't we think about that? We could have totally done that. So I really highly recommend that. And again, we were able to do that with this PACE grant. And next slide, and I believe this is my last section. Again, we wanted to understand our program support and analytics. And this is more of our data side. We wanted to create dashboards to see were our students enrolling. We wanted to capture that demographic. So again, I know we talked about first time in college enrollment to get them in, but we also wanted to make sure, were they sustaining in our systems once we had them? So next slide. We worked with our IRIS, and of course we are utilizing Tableau, but we wanted to make sure that they were enrolling again. So from the fall semester, fall 22 to spring, we identified 4,000 students that identified from 25 to 64, the demographic we were looking for, that we targeted. And we wanted to make sure they were enrolled, and we were successful in that we got 61% to re-enroll for the spring semester. Our traditional persistence is typically around 40%. So we saw significant growth with this population. So we were very excited to work with Graduation Alliance on this. And again, they operated as a success coach, similar to some of the strategies that you guys are utilizing, because we do have an advising model and we do have an enrollment model, but they were really that last push to say, hey, don't forget about registration, or how can I help you navigate to whatever issue that you're currently having. So they were a great partner to work with. And so again, these were some of the successes. So again, I know I went through this really quickly. I am open to, if you have any questions. I'm not sure, Ivy, if we have any in the chat, but here's my information. Feel free to contact me directly, and I can answer any questions that you might have in terms of programming or to review any of these strategies. What is your course completion of those 61%? Well, we're currently in our semester. So at the end of the semester, we'll definitely be able to look at that information. The 61% was enrollment to the spring 2023. And so our semester doesn't end until next week. Great question. I just saw that last one pop up.
Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate both of your presentations, Todd and Monica. I do have some questions from the chat to pose to you all. Monica, I think I'm going to give your voice a break because you just got through talking. So I'll start with some questions for Todd and give you a second. So first, Todd, we got a question from Denise, who wanted to know if there were specific topics that coaches were covering or were intended to cover with every student they coached. Was there a through line and specific things that coaches worked through with their assigned students?
Initially, yes. So at the beginning of our what we call career path classes, which are those that I mentioned that are on a micro pathway, we actually have an introductory session, which is pre-learning. And we talk about everything from classroom expectations, we review the schedule, but then we also talk about the communication process and lines of communication, and who they should talk to about it, instructional questions, and who they should talk to about, let's say, non-academic questions. So it's more orienting them to how to get help quickly initially, but our coaches are really, I'm going to say, subject matter experts on all the resources at the college. So initially, it's very simply an orientation to who does what and some examples of the type of support that someone might need. And then it's just responding to the student needs from there. Our coaches are, they're actually within our department in the workforce development office. So oftentimes they're just connectors. One interesting thing I'll mention, it's a little outside the scope of the question, but the impact on completion for our shorter term courses that the coaches have had, we are now going to implement that as an institution. So we are going to be, we've already put forward, and it's been approved by our board of trustees to have success coaches. They're non-academic success coaches, the same model. for all of our students throughout all of our departments. I hope that answers the question. They have to be prepared to talk about anything. But initially, they just provide examples of the types of assistance that students would need.
Thanks so much, Todd. That's really helpful. I know there are folks in the chat who were really interested in strategies to schedule courses that makes them accessible to adult learners. So I'm wondering if both of you could speak to that a little bit, knowing the demographics of the students that you serve, knowing that many are working, many are parenting. How did you ensure that the time and program delivery methods were going to be accessible to those students? Do you have any advice to offer?
I see I'll start, and then Monica, I'll hand it over to you. Yes, so part of the initial listening work that we did for about 18 months before this was absolutely related to that. Not only did we get answers through like our focus groups, but we actually did survey information with like a lot of different examples of, hey, which schedule would work for you, which one wouldn't? Because we've learned that survey construction is key. You know, if you ask students if they'd prefer a face-to-face course to online, they'll almost always say they prefer face-to-face. Then when you stand up face-to-face in online courses, nobody enrolls in face-to-face because they are not able to. So the lessons we learned, I'll just give you some examples. Most of our courses are offered 2 to 3 hours, either in the early evening or late afternoon. So working adults who work an A shift or a C shift can take the evening sessions. Those who work B or a C shift can take the afternoon sessions. And then what we do, the reason the kind of geographic piece is important for our model is we have labs that are portable that we bring to our sites. They're either using VR, which is literally just a pair of headsets for every couple students, or they're portable small pieces of lab equipment. Those labs rotate amongst the sites and they're done on Saturdays. So it's not an every Saturday commitment for the adult. It's maybe one Saturday a month, and they have a few options as to where they might even want to go. So I hope that helps with a little more concrete example, but our general cadence is 2 sessions a week from 2 to 3 hours, either after an A shift in the early evening or before a B shift in the late afternoon.
Thanks so much. Monica, did you have any thoughts on that? Like the synchronous, asynchronous, online, in person? How did you make this work for your adult learners?
Absolutely. So what we do is, again, we evaluate our course scheduler. And so 2 things that we do. We look at the modality to ensure that it's consistent in terms or it's equitable in terms of the program delivery and the program needs, right? So we're evaluating that at the very end of each semester. And we relay that information to our colleges who disseminate that to their program chairs. And so we want to make sure that the course availability is matched. And then of course we want to know and understand which courses are offered and does it meet the needs and are they filling up? The other thing that we also want to evaluate and that we do evaluate is looking at what is registered first. Do our students tend to register for online classes first? And again, right, ours is a little unique in the sense that our courses are online, our offerings are online. So we don't necessarily look at the different times as other programs would or different departments would. But for us, understanding, you know, what do students typically register for first and what kind of courses are those? You know, and so we understand that kind of thing and we want to share that with our department as well to meet the needs of that. I believe there was a couple other questions in there, and I think one of them was, what were some examples that we took away from the focus groups? Some things in terms of enrollment was, we thought our pricing communication strategies were effective, and they're not. And they're actually not very, they're not received as we thought they would. We do offer for our online learners, we do offer additional or supplemental pricing in the sense that it's lower for out of district and out of state students. However, when you're talking about recruiting or enrolling, that's just not a conversation that they're willing to have. However, it is something that they're considering. So I think looking at that and making sure that we are including that, but in a different manner, that was one of the feedback that we received. The other thing too was, and I completely just lost my train of thought, was that our students, when they're looking and they're searching for a school, because we're a unique district in that we have 5 colleges, once they've set their mind to a campus, they want to go to that campus. So if they don't enroll, then they're just don't, if it doesn't meet their needs, then they're not enrolling at any of our 5 campuses, which is extremely important, right? Because for us, we understand that we're competing against not necessarily ourselves, but we're not competing against major campuses regionally. But we know that we need to make sure that our customer service is ample in meeting the needs of our students. And so again, that's something that we had to really revamp in our services and ensuring that, again, we're calling them within 24 hours or same business day to make sure that their answers are being met. And I think that was the only thing that I saw in terms of additional questions in the chat. I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure we
Yeah,
got
no,
those
that's
covered.
fine, Monica. Then thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, that question was like, what did you see had worked and what hadn't worked in terms of communicating with students? So with the pricing piece, was the lower pricing for online confusing students? Was that where you were losing them, or what was it about that communication that
I think that it was just the fact that they didn't want to talk about pricing. I think in the sense students are
Gotcha.
aware that it's going to be an investment. And so it's just one of those communication strategies that just could possibly do without. Maybe talk to them as in terms of pricing, maybe gear them towards financial aid and gear them towards, support services that can provide financial assistance, instead of actually talking to them about, what our pricing model looks like. And again, it's not necessarily a here's your tuition cost, but it's here's some, some opportunities if you're out of district, out of state. So while we thought we were enticing them, that wasn't the reception.
That's really helpful. That's really helpful. Well, we've got about 6 minutes left. I want to try to get to as many questions as I can. Let me ask one that might be pretty quick for you, Todd. Sherry wanted to know if for your work, was there a designated program manager? And I actually might like to hear that from Monica too, because you're spinning up these new initiatives. How do you manage that at a campus level? Is somebody assigned to that? How does that work?
Yeah, so one distinction I want to make is for our purely online courses, there is not a dedicated program manager, but the programs that I've been referring to that uses this grit model, these are what we call career pathway programs. So they're not asynchronous online. So we do have asynchronous online courses, that more of the type that Monica's mentioning. We don't have a program manager for those. And so the other thing I wanted to mention, and I think this will address Dawn's comment too, is so we are talking about a cohort model, and because of the learners we're targeting, which are not every learner at the college, we don't do asynchronous online. And that does help, to Don's comment, that does help with minimum enrollment, because now we have one faculty member who is teaching one course at multiple sites. So I hope I'm not overstating it, but that's a really important part of this model. Now, if we have a minimum enrollment of 8 over multiple sites, that course runs. So it's providing access, and it's helping with again, to your comment, Dawn, with locations that traditionally just would never have hit a minimum enrollment of 8. Did I cover both questions, both parts of the question there, Ivy?
I think you sure did. Yeah.
Okay.
And Monica, how about you?
Great question. So for our micro credentials, in terms of our non-credit offerings, we do have a team within our department that is reviewing that. And so, of course, again, they're looking at, what's in demand right now, what are we offering. At the end of every term, we're looking at our enrollment to see what worked, what didn't work, what is our best completer. And we tend to utilize that to advertise and market. However, we are working with major organization and companies within our city. And so we're looking at their requirements as well. So we do partner with them, and we gauge to see what they're asking for. Are we meeting their needs? Do we have offerings that they could benefit from or they could utilize? So it's a collective strategy of making sure that the industry standards is there, or the industry requirements or demands are there, and then of course working with actual companies and organizations within our city to make sure that, one, we have a customer out there, but two, to make sure that we have that partner and connection that we could fill our seats and fill our programs.
That's great. Thank you. All right. I'm going to ask one more question from my chat champion today, Sherry. I think you win the prize for the most questions, and I appreciate your engagement so much. Sherry wants to know, and I'd love just a 1-minute answer from each of you, if that's possible. Do you have dedicated enrollment staff for just adult learners or just online learners? How does that work? Todd, can we start with you?
Sure. Our coach, you said enrollment or coaching? Sorry, I guess I can't start right away.
Enrollment staff for adult learners or enrollment staff for online learners, I believe.
Yeah, so we actually don't divide it by whether they're adults or young adults or youth. We divide it by the program. So we have dedicated coaches for our career path programs, for our transfer programs. We don't have dedicated coaches for our solely self-directed online programs.
And I'll speak to ours really quickly. So our enrollment coach model is we have enrollment staff at every campus, and they're working with our traditional students, brick and mortar, that are coming in campus. Ours are housed here at the district, but we are working specifically with our adult learners that are wanting to intend or that have intentions to enroll fully online. Does that mean they enroll fully online? Not necessarily, but we're unique in that, of course, our services are catered towards that adult population.
Awesome. Well, you were so fast. I'm going to throw one more out at you. And this is all right, Todd. I think this is for you. Are the coaches certified that you hired? And just can you give a very brief overview of their background? Is it a new position that you made for the coaches, or is that like an added responsibility?
During the pilot, we utilized the instructional coordinators for the programs as coaches and just train them in the referral process. Now we're using advisors. There's not a standard certification, but we're in a union environment here, so they all are staff members who are they're higher ed professionals. They're either academic advisors or advisors in the student support services area. So as we've scaled up and the numbers have supported creating positions, that's what their qualifications are.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. Thank you, Monica, for dropping that in the chat as well. Really, really appreciate it. I don't really know who's closing out this session, so I will say thank you to everyone for joining. Thank you to Todd. Thank you to Monica. Thank you to Erica, who was running this from behind the scenes. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of this amazing summit.